We begin in New York. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu is calling for debt forgiveness for developing countries and measures to recover proceeds of corruption and illicit financial flows from such countries. The president emphasized the importance of inclusivity, equality and cooperation in addressing global challenges such as terrorism, climate change, poverty and food crisis. The president also urged world leaders to strengthen multilateralism through deeper cooperation among United Nations member states. President Tinubu, represented by Vice President Kashim Shettima, decried the rise of singularity and nationalism, which he believes undermines collective efforts to resolve global issues. He reaffirmed Nigeria's commitment to multilateralism and expressed concern about UN's ability to sustain its relevance and resilience. And for more on this, let's cross live to New York and speak to Arise international correspondent Adefemi Akinsonya. Hello, Adefemi. It's great to speak with you again. Now, let's start with the speech of Vice President Kashim Shettima. What are the key takeaways from his address at the UN General Assembly?
The Vice President taking to the stage on the second night of discussions at the general debate was definitely highly anticipated. And I do think for many people who listened in and watched during his speech and thereafter, they did seem to be quite satisfied with what he had to say. He talks a lot about the divides internationally between the developed world, quote unquote, and the global south. He talked about how the international community does need to rally around the global south. And then specifically looking at Nigeria, he did speak at length at the need to allow African countries, Nigeria, to become more internationally competitive, to have them be allowed to have the breathing space so that they can truly develop, especially since there's so much focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So, for example, he did talk a lot about debt forgiveness. And this is somebody who's coming from a business and a financial background, such as the Vice President. So naturally, he did feel quite comfortable discussing the implications of Nigeria's ballooning debt profile and the issues that type of financial pressure is having on the country, especially at a time like it is in Nigeria with so much economic strife happening across all factions of society. So he did go ahead and talk about debt relief, but also about the importance of security, talked about, again, Nigeria's place in the world, its great attributes, the great things to look forward to in the country. But definitely another tenet that he talked about was security and how the international community, to some extent, needs to start putting its money where its mouth is when it comes to solving international conflicts and problems. It does need to be a situation where Nigeria and African countries are at the table, specifically talking about the United Nations Security Council now. African countries, Nigeria too, have been calling for a permanent seat at that table. They do want to be able to be involved in a truly international effort to solve these types of issues. And to many people, they would argue that it makes the most sense that if we are talking about issues specific to a nation or to a region, that those countries should be involved in the solutions being debated. So it will be interesting to see towards the end of the month when the United Nations Security Council meets and convene on this specific issue. United Nations Security Council against the backdrop of other international stories happening today. As you read out in your headlines, we do know that Israel and Hezbollah are in all-out war. And overnight as well, that they are striking Lebanon, and he has told their ground staff to prepare for a possible invasion. Huge in terms of the prospects of a full war coming out. And the irony is not lost on any of us. This is happening, this announcement happening as the United Nations Security Council met earlier this morning to discuss ways to maintain international peace. So you can imagine just the irony of all of these countries, all of these heads of states coming together to discuss ways to bring the world away from the brink of war, only for Israel to declare that it is preparing for a possible ground invasion in Lebanon. It is huge stuff.
Well, that's actually something that the leaders most likely would have to resolve, or how they will be involved in ensuring that a world war does not eventually happen. Let's talk about, aside from the issues, war and all that, let's talk about climate change and how the world leaders are committing to ensuring that they accelerate efforts towards meeting the deadline, the 2030 deadline.
Definitely. I mean, 2030 is just around the corner. And while for a long time the focus internationally was on this Paris climate agreement, there is clearly now a renewed effort to really understand the impact of every single region of this world and what they contribute to this issue of climate change and global natural disasters. As you've said, the environment, climate, sustainability is a huge theme at this year's United Nations General Assembly. It has taken many forms across different main events, side events, conversations being had, debate remarks by heads of state, constantly talking about sustainability. And as I said, it happens and it's been discussed in a lot of different ways. For example, in some areas, we're looking at food security and sustainability when it comes to crops, and finding out ways that people in every part of the world, but especially the developing world, can have access to food security, despite the fact that we are moving towards a sustainable world where we're more conscious about sustainability in this world. And then also looking at general climate emissions and the like. It is a huge topic for what we're seeing at UNGA this week. This is, of course, Climate Change Action Week 2. So there is a lot of discussion being made. Nigeria is also represented when it comes to sustainability and environment by different levels of federal government here. Again, just to reiterate just how serious climate is being taken at this year's General Assembly. In addition to talking about climate change, though, and security and international world order, another thing that's really taken the lead now is also youth and how they can be how youth can be harnessed in a way to, again, allow countries, not just in the Western world or in the developing world, but specifically looking at now Nigeria, for example, or global South countries, allowing them to be able to harness their own human resources and be able to take advantage of that and make them a global leader. And funnily enough, this is something that Nigeria has been able to do, or at least showcase here at UNGA. We do have Minister Hannatu Musawa, who has hosted a number of events at UNGA this week. She's done she's been quite visible and quite visibly making sure that Nigeria's profile when it comes to the creative economy, when it comes to innovation and digital economy as well, has definitely been highlighted and focused on. She hosted an event last night that, again, brought the Nigerian diaspora back under one roof, where they were able to showcase lots of different bits of our creativity, whether it's food and cuisine, language, music, and all of the like, fashion too. So that's definitely something that's also been dominating discourse, in addition to the serious aspects of course, international conflict and trying to move away from conflict, and then, of course, sustainability. It is also quite happy to see that Nigeria is leading the way when it comes to conversations about the creative economy at UNGA and beyond.
You've covered so much in our conversation, such a little time. But before I let you go,
Georgina,
yeah.
Before we go, I know we're running out of time, but I did want to also mention that we are stood outside Unstoppable Africa. This is an event, one of the main events by the Global Africa Business Initiative, and it's been a wonderful event so far. It happens across 2 different days, and this first day has had a stacked guest list. So we've had, of course, the Deputy Director General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed, take to the stage and discuss her ideas for, again, harnessing the best of Africa. And then in terms of Nigerian representation, Alhaji Aliko Dangote also took to the stage in a one-on-one conversation with the moderators to talk about his own journey as it pertains to him being an entrepreneur that is wholly focused and dedicated to the betterment of Nigeria and Africa as a whole. We also had the likes of Afreximbank President Professor Benedict Orama also taken to the stage in a panel, again discussing the greatness that is Africa, the potential it has, and the potential it's already able to actualize. And just a few moments ago, we did have President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina also enter. He will be making remarks at some point today. So it is a lot happening when we're looking at Africa and its presence here at the United Nations General Assembly. And see, Georgina, I just can't help myself. We've also, while we've been here having conversations on the sidelines, some are on record, some off record, we have been hearing that there is a prospect that some Nigerian ministers who are actually here in New York for the United Nations General Assembly could be on some form of a metaphorical chopping block, as there is some lines that are reaching us here that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who did not come into Onga in person, may be considering a possible cabinet reshuffle of his ministers. And as I said, Nigeria is ably represented here. The Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment is here in New York, for example. I did already mention Minister Hannatu Musawa also being here. The Minister of Youth, we did see her yesterday. Again, not too much confirmed information, but it does seem as though those specific ministries may be prone or vulnerable to some form of a reshuffle. Even that is reaching us here in New York, Georgina.
Indeed, yes, we already have that information, and we'll be getting to see what happens as the day continues today. Thank you so much, Adefemi, for your insights. Really interesting, great stuff. Well done.
Always a pleasure.